The first thing I noticed wasn't the silence in my empty house or the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen counter. It was the smell of Janet's perfume still lingering in my hallway. Expensive, cloying, the kind that announces itself like a warning. My daughter-in-law had been here yesterday, rifling through my jewelry box again under the pretense of helping me organize. I stood in my doorway at 63, watching the November rain streak down my windows, and felt the familiar weight of being invisible in my own life. The house that had once buzzed with holiday preparations and family dinners now echoed with the hollow sound of my own footsteps. My daughters, Nancy and Madeline, had their own lives now. Successful careers, beautiful homes, husbands who provided everything I never could after their father died. They didn't need me anymore, except when they did. The phone rang, cutting through my thoughts like a blade. "Mom?" Nancy's voice carried that particular tone I'd learned to recognize. Bright, urgent, slightly breathless. "We have the most amazing news." I lowered myself into my reading chair, the one with the worn armrest where I'd spent countless evenings waiting for calls that came less and less frequently. "What's that, sweetheart?" "Madeline and we've planned something incredible. A mother-daughter cruise. Just the three of us like old times. Can you believe it? The Mediterranean, Mom. 15 days of pure luxury." My heart stuttered. When was the last time they'd wanted to spend 15 minutes with me, let alone 15 days? "That sounds wonderful, but we leave next week." Madeline's voice joined in. They had me on speaker, I realized. "We've already booked everything. The Oceanic Grandeur, one of those ships with the glass elevators and the French restaurants. You're going to love it." The enthusiasm in their voices felt manufactured, like the smile I'd worn at their last birthday parties when they'd given me gift cards instead of presents. "Girls, I'm not sure I can afford—" "Don't be silly," Nancy interrupted. "We'll handle all the details. You just need to pack and show up. Consider it our treat." Their treat. I closed my eyes, remembering the last time they'd treated me to something. A Mother's Day brunch where they'd spent the entire meal on their phones, coordinating schedules that somehow never included me. But this felt different. 15 days together. Maybe we could find our way back to each other. That's incredibly generous of you both." "We love you, Mom," Madeline said, and for a moment, I almost believed the warmth in her voice was real. "We know things have been hard since Dad died. We want to make new memories together." After I hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, watching the rain and feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Hope. Maybe I'd been wrong about them. Maybe they did need me, want me, love me the way I'd always loved them, fiercely and without condition. The next morning, I found myself in the travel agency downtown, a small storefront wedged between a dry cleaner and a coffee shop. The agent, a woman about my age with kind eyes, spread brochures across her desk. "The Oceanic Grandeur," she said, pulling out a glossy pamphlet. "Beautiful ship. Very expensive." "How expensive?" She showed me the rates, and my breath caught. Even the cheapest interior cabin cost more than I spent on groceries in 3 months. "Are you sure this is the right ship?" My daughters said they were handling the arrangements. "Let me check." Her fingers flew across her keyboard. "Yes, here we are. 3 passengers departing next Tuesday, 2 Ocean View suites and 1—" She paused, frowning at her screen. "1 what?" "1 interior cabin. The smallest category they offer." She looked up at me with something that might have been pity. "Is that what you expected?" The hope in my chest began to curdle. "Could you tell me who made the booking?" More typing. "A Nancy Maloney and Madeline Finney. Payment was made on a credit card ending in 4712. My credit card." I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles went white. The card ending in 4712 was supposed to be for emergencies only, the one I'd given them access to after Bruce died, when I was drowning in medical bills and funeral expenses and couldn't think straight. They'd promised to use it only if I needed help, only if I asked. At home, I called my bank with shaking fingers. "Mrs. Morella? Yes, I can see the transaction. $42,000 charged yesterday to Celestial Cruise Lines." 42,000? The number hit me like a physical blow. That's correct. Would you like me to read you the details? I listened in growing horror as she itemized the charges. 2 luxury suites with private balconies, specialty dining packages, spa treatments, shore excursions, premium beverage packages, and what appeared to be every possible upgrade available. And tucked at the bottom, almost as an afterthought, 1 interior cabin with no amenities. There's also a note here, the representative continued. The booking was made with special instructions that all charges be applied to the account holder, that's you, with automatic approval for any additional expenses during the voyage. I hung up without saying goodbye. The house felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in on me. I walked to my kitchen window and stared out at the small garden Bruce and I had planted together 30 years ago. The roses were dormant now, their thorny branches bare against the gray sky. Just like me, I thought. Stripped of everything beautiful, left with only the parts that could hurt. My phone buzzed with a text from Nancy. So excited for our trip. Don't pack too much. There's not much storage in your room. The emoji felt like a slap. I sat at my kitchen table and opened my laptop, my fingers moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. First, I called the bank again. I need to report fraudulent charges, I said, my voice steady for the first time in months. Ma'am, these charges were made with a card registered to your account, with your authorization. Authorization I'm now revoking. I want to report this card as stolen. There was a pause. Are you saying someone stole your physical card? I'm saying someone stole my trust, and $42,000. The bureaucratic wheels began to turn. Reports were filed, investigations were opened, the charges were frozen pending review. I provided documentation showing the pattern of my typical spending. Grocery stores, utility bills, the occasional book or coffee shop purchase. Nothing even remotely approaching a luxury cruise. Then I did something that would have been unthinkable just hours earlier. I changed all my passwords. Every account, every automatic payment, every digital footprint that connected me to my daughters. I locked them out of everything. By evening, my phone was ringing constantly. Nancy first, then Madeline, their voices growing increasingly shrill with each unanswered call. Finally, a text arrived that made my hands shake. Mom, there's some kind of mistake with the payment. The cruise line is saying there's an issue with your card. Can you call them? We leave in 3 days. I turned off my phone and sat in my chair, watching the darkness settle over my empty house. For the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like freedom. Part 2. I slept better that night than I had in months, but morning brought the sound of car doors slamming in my driveway. Through my bedroom window, I watched Nancy's black Mercedes and Madeline's silver BMW park side by side, their engines still running like getaway cars. My heart hammered against my ribs as I pulled on my robe and walked downstairs. The doorbell rang 3 times in rapid succession, followed by aggressive knocking. Mom, open up! Nancy's voice carried a note I'd never heard before, desperation wrapped in barely controlled rage. We know you're in there! I stood in my entryway, my hand on the doorknob, and felt something shift inside me. For 38 years, I'd opened doors for them, literally and figuratively. Every time they needed money, advice, babysitting, or just someone to blame for their disappointments, I'd opened that door. But now, with my back pressed against the cool wood, I discovered something remarkable. I didn't have to. Mom, please. Madeline's voice joined in, softer but no less urgent. There's been some terrible mistake. The cruise line says our payment was declined. We need to talk. I closed my eyes and remembered the last family dinner I'd hosted. Bruce's birthday, 2 months before he died. Nancy had spent the entire evening on her phone while Madeline complained about the food. Neither had helped with dishes. Nancy's husband Kenneth had fallen asleep on my couch after drinking my wine, and their children had torn through my house like vandals while their parents ignored them completely. I'd cleaned for 3 days afterward, finding broken ornaments and crayon marks on my walls. We can see your car in the garage. Nancy's voice rose. Stop being ridiculous and answer the door. Ridiculous. The word hit me like a physical blow. How many times had they called me that over the years? Ridiculous for saving their childhood artwork. Ridiculous for wanting family photos at Christmas. Ridiculous for crying at Bruce's funeral while they worried about how long the service was taking. I walked to my kitchen and made coffee, my hands steady despite the continued pounding on my front door. The morning sun streamed through my windows, warming my face as I sat at the small table Bruce and I had bought at a garage sale 40 years ago. Simple, sturdy, built to last. Unlike the trust I'd had in my daughters. My phone, which I'd turned back on, buzzed constantly. Text after text, each more frantic than the last. Nancy. Mom? This isn't funny anymore. We leave tomorrow. Madeline. The cruise line says you reported the card stolen. What's wrong with you? Nancy. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is? We already told everyone we're going. Madeline. You're being vindictive and petty. Dad would be ashamed. That last text made my coffee cup rattle against its saucer. Bruce would be ashamed. Of them, maybe. He'd spent his last months watching our daughters visit only when they needed something, their hands always out, their attention always elsewhere. In his final days, when morphine couldn't touch the pain anymore, he'd whispered to me, "Don't let them take everything, Loretta. Promise me you won't disappear." I'd promised. And for 8 months after his funeral, I'd broken that promise daily, shrinking smaller and smaller until I was barely a shadow in my own life. The pounding stopped suddenly, and I heard their voices through the door, muffled but distinct. "Told you we should have waited until after the cruise to give her the news," Nancy was saying. "How was I supposed to know she'd check the charges?" Madeline's voice was sharp with irritation. "She never pays attention to anything anymore." "Well, she's paying attention now. Jesus, $42,000. Do you think she'll really press charges? Against her own daughters? Please. She's just throwing a tantrum because we didn't ask permission first. She'll get over it." My blood turned to ice. They thought this was a tantrum, a phase, something to wait out until I came to my senses and resumed my role as their personal ATM. I stood up so quickly my chair scraped against the floor. The conversation outside stopped abruptly. "What news?" I called through the door, my voice carrying in the morning air. "What news were you going to give me after the cruise?" Silence. Then whispered arguing I couldn't quite make out. "Mom?" Nancy finally said, her voice artificially bright again. "Let's talk about this inside, like a family." "We are talking." "What news, Nancy?" More silence. I could picture them exchanging glances, debating how much to reveal. Finally, Madeline spoke, her words careful and measured. "We were going to tell you that, well, we think it's time for you to consider making some changes. This house is too big for you now, and the upkeep is expensive. There are lovely senior communities. You want to sell my house." The words came out flat, emotionless. "Not sell," Nancy jumped in quickly. "More like, help you transition. Kenneth knows a really good realtor, and Madeline's husband Richard works in estate management. We could handle everything for you. Make sure you get a fair price." A fair price. I laughed, the sound harsh and unfamiliar even to my own ears. "And where would I live while you're handling everything for me?" "Well, there's this beautiful place about an hour from here, Sunset Manor. They have activities and meal service, and you wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore." Sunset Manor. I knew that place. A warehouse for inconvenient relatives, where families deposited their elderly like unwanted luggage. I'd driven past it once and seen the residents sitting in wheelchairs by the windows, staring out at a parking lot like prisoners watching the free world. "An hour away?" I repeated. "It's not that far," Madeline said defensively. "We could visit on weekends, when it's convenient." "Mom, you're twisting our words. We're trying to help you." I pressed my forehead against the door, feeling the cool wood against my skin. Help me. They wanted to help me right out of my home, my independence, my life. Park me somewhere convenient while they divided up the proceeds from selling everything Bruce and I had built together. "The cruise," I said slowly, "was a farewell tour, wasn't it? One last mother-daughter trip before you shuffled me off to die." "Don't be so dramatic," Nancy snapped, her false sweetness finally cracking. "People your age live in communities like that all the time. It's normal. People your age. As if 63 was ancient. As if I was already dead and just too stubborn to lie down." "Look," Madeline said, "we're going to be late for our flight if we don't resolve this. Can you just call the bank and tell them it was a mistake? We'll talk about everything else when we get back. When they got back, from their luxury vacation, paid for with my money. While I sat at home contemplating which assisted living facility would be my final stop, I walked away from the door without another word and climbed the stairs to my bedroom. From my window, I watched them argue in my driveway for another 10 minutes before finally driving away. Nancy's tires left black marks on my pavement. Alone again, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room I'd shared with Bruce for 35 years. His side of the closet still held his clothes, and his reading glasses sat on the nightstand next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. I'd been saving everything, preserving it like a shrine, afraid that letting go of his things would mean letting go of him. But Bruce wasn't in those objects. He was in the garden we'd planted, the memories we'd made, the promises we'd shared. And one of those promises was that I wouldn't let our daughters erase me. I pulled out my laptop and began typing with a purpose that surprised me. Email after email, each one deliberate and final. I canceled the automatic payments that connected my accounts to their expenses, Nancy's gym membership, Madeline's car insurance, the credit cards I'd foolishly agreed to guarantee when they were just starting out 15 years ago. Then I called my lawyer, Harrison Webb, a kind man who'd handled Bruce's will and had known our family for decades. "Loretta, what can I do for you?" "I need to change my will," I said without preamble. "Completely." There was a pause. "That's certainly your right. May I ask what's prompting this decision?" I told him about the cruise, the conversation I'd overheard, their plans for my future. My voice remained steady throughout, as if I were discussing the weather rather than dismantling my children's expectations. "I see," he said when I finished. "And what would you like your new arrangements to be?" I looked out my window at the garden, at the bird feeder Bruce had built, at the apple tree we'd planted the year Nancy was born. "I'm not sure yet, but I know what I don't want. I don't want them to inherit the consequences of their choices without facing any consequences themselves." "I understand. Why don't you come in next week? We'll have plenty of time to discuss your options." After I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Control. Not the illusion of control that came from keeping everyone else happy, but real control over my own life and future. My phone rang. Nancy again. This time, I answered. "Thank God," she breathed. "Mom, you scared us. We're at the airport and—" "Have a wonderful trip," I said calmly. "What?" "I said have a wonderful trip. The Mediterranean is beautiful this time of year." "But what about the payment? The cruise line says—" "I'm sure you'll figure something out. You're both very resourceful women." "Mom, we can't afford this without my money." I finished her sentence for her. "Yes, I imagine that's quite a problem." The silence stretched between us, filled with everything we weren't saying. Finally, Nancy spoke, her voice smaller than I'd heard it in years. "Are you really going to let us miss this cruise? After everything we've planned?" I thought about all the things I'd missed over the years because they'd been too busy. Birthdays when they'd sent cards instead of visiting. Holidays when they'd divided their time between Bruce and me and their in-laws, measuring minutes like rations. The loneliness of evenings when I'd cooked for 3 and eaten alone because they'd canceled at the last minute. "Nancy," I said gently, "you're going to miss a lot more than a cruise." And then I hung up. The house settled around me in the gathering twilight, and for the first time since Bruce died, I wasn't afraid of the silence. Tomorrow, they'd be on a ship somewhere in the Atlantic, discovering what it felt like to want something they couldn't have. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd finally get their mother-daughter trip, just not the way they'd planned. I made myself dinner and ate it slowly, tasting every bite. Then I went to Bruce's computer and began researching something I'd never considered before. Travel insurance. For one. Part 3. 3 days passed in blissful silence. No calls, no texts, no unexpected visits. I imagined Nancy and Madeline somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, frantically trying to explain to cruise staff why their credit cards were being declined for every champagne toast and spa treatment they'd planned. The thought should have brought me satisfaction, but instead, I felt something deeper, a cold, crystalline clarity I hadn't experienced in years. On Thursday morning, I was watering Bruce's orchids when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass, I could see a figure in a dark suit, too tall to be either of my daughters. When I opened the door, a young woman with kind eyes and an official badge smiled at me. "Mrs. Morella, I'm Special Agent Diana Reed with the FBI Financial Crimes Division. May I come in?" My heart skipped, but my voice remained steady. "Of course." She settled into Bruce's favorite chair while I poured coffee. Her presence somehow both intimidating and reassuring. "I understand you reported fraudulent charges on your credit card." $42,000, I said, sitting across from her. "Charged by my daughters without my knowledge or consent." Agent Reed opened a tablet and began scrolling through what I assumed was my case file. "The bank's investigation flagged some irregularities. This isn't the first time charges have been made on your account by these individuals." "What do you mean?" "Over the past 18 months, there have been numerous charges totaling approximately $68,000. Restaurants, shopping, car payments, insurance premiums, all authorized by the secondary cardholders, Nancy Maloney and Madeline Finney. $68,000. I set my coffee cup down carefully, afraid my shaking hands would betray the earthquake happening inside my chest. I knew about some of it. They said they were going through difficult times. "Mrs. Morella, when someone uses another person's financial resources without explicit consent for each transaction, especially when there's a pattern of escalating amounts, it constitutes financial elder abuse. The cruise charges were simply the largest single transaction. Elder abuse. The words hit me like ice water. I wasn't just a victim of my daughter's selfishness. I was a statistic, a cautionary tale. One of those pitiful stories you read about in the newspaper and shake your head at, wondering how someone could be so naive. "What happens now?" I asked. "The investigation is ongoing. We've frozen the cruise booking, and the cruise line has been cooperative. Your daughters..." She paused, consulting her tablet. "They're currently on board the Oceanic Grandeur, but they're being moved to a basic interior cabin, and all premium services have been revoked. They'll be met by authorities when the ship docks in Barcelona tomorrow." The image of Nancy and Madeline being escorted off a cruise ship by Spanish police should have horrified me. Instead, I felt nothing but a quiet sense of justice. Will they be arrested? That depends partly on you. As the victim, you have the right to press charges or seek restitution through civil means. But Mrs. Morella, I need to ask, is there anything else you think I should know? Any other financial irregularities or concerning behavior? I thought about Janet Waters rifling through my jewelry box, about Kenneth Smith's casual assumption that he could handle my house sale, about Richard Kirk's expertise in estate management. How long had they been planning this? How many family dinners had been strategy sessions for dividing up my life? "There might be," I said slowly. "My daughters mentioned that their husbands had already been making arrangements. For selling my house, managing my affairs. I don't think any of it was legal yet, but..." Agent Reed made notes. "We'll look into that. In the meantime, I'd recommend you secure all your accounts, review any legal documents you've signed recently, and consider consulting with an attorney about asset protection." After she left, I sat in my kitchen and called Harrison Webb again. "Loretta, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up?" "I've had better weeks," I said dryly. "Harrison, I need to ask you something. In the past 2 years since Bruce died, have any documents been filed regarding my property or affairs? Anything I might not remember signing?" There was a pause. "Let me check our records. Yes, actually. There was a power of attorney document filed about 6 months ago. Limited scope. But it gave Nancy authority to make certain financial decisions on your behalf if you became incapacitated." My blood turned to ice. "I never signed any power of attorney. The document has your signature, Loretta. It was notarized and filed properly. But now that you mention it, the circumstances were unusual. Nancy brought it in herself, said you were too upset about something to come in person but had asked her to handle it." Too upset about something? I remembered 6 months ago. It was right after I'd found out about Bruce's secret medical bills, the ones that had been piling up while he tried to protect me from the financial stress. I'd been crying for days, barely able to function. Nancy had been so helpful, so supportive, offering to handle the paperwork stuff so I wouldn't have to deal with it. Harrison, I said carefully, if someone forged my signature on a legal document, what would be the consequences? Forgery of a legal document is a felony, Loretta. But we'd need to prove it wasn't your signature. Do you think? I think my daughters have been planning my obsolescence longer than I realized. Bring me any documents you can find at home. Bank statements, anything they might have had you sign. We'll sort this out. That afternoon, I went through every drawer, every file, every stack of papers in my house. What I found made my hands shake with rage. Insurance beneficiary changes I didn't remember making. A reverse mortgage application with my signature, thankfully never completed. But how close had I come to losing my home entirely? And most damning of all, tucked behind Bruce's death certificate, a handwritten note in Nancy's handwriting. Mom's house appraised at $340K. Split 4 ways after taxes, bar $75K each. Sunset Manor deposit, bar $25K. Net, bar $50K each. Not bad for a year's work. 4 ways. Nancy, Madeline, Kenneth, and Richard. They'd carved up my life like a pie before I was even gone. I photographed everything and drove to Harrison's office, my hands steady on the steering wheel despite the fury burning in my chest. He examined the documents with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant, occasionally muttering under his breath. Loretta, I'm afraid this is worse than we thought. The power of attorney document. I've compared it to your signature on Bruce's will and other documents. It's a very good forgery, but it's definitely not your handwriting. The pressure patterns are wrong, and there are several letter formations that don't match your natural hand. What does that mean? It means your daughters committed fraud to gain access to your financial affairs. Combined with the FBI investigation into the credit card charges, they're looking at serious federal and state charges. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mom, they took our phones, but I borrowed one. Please call the American Embassy in Barcelona. This is all a misunderstanding. We love you. Nancy. I showed the text to Harrison, who raised his eyebrows. They're asking you to help them? Apparently. Will you? I thought about the question seriously. 24 hours ago, I might have. The old Loretta, the one who'd spent 38 years putting her daughter's needs before her own, might have been on the next plane to Spain with a lawyer and bail money. But that Loretta had died somewhere between discovering the cruise charges and finding Nancy's handwritten calculation of my worth. This Loretta, the one sitting in Harrison's office holding evidence of her daughter's betrayal, felt nothing but cold satisfaction at their panic. No, I said simply. Are you sure? This is your last chance to minimize the legal consequences for them. Harrison, they weren't planning to minimize the consequences for me. They were planning to warehouse me in a nursing home and sell everything Bruce and I built together. They forged legal documents and stole nearly $70,000. They treated me like an obstacle to overcome rather than a person to love. I folded the documents carefully and put them back in my purse. They made their choices. Now they get to live with them. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since Bruce died. I cooked a real dinner. Pot roast with vegetables, the way he'd loved it. I set the table with our good china and lit candles, creating a celebration for one. As I ate, I thought about the conversation I'd overheard outside my door 3 days ago. She never pays attention to anything anymore. They'd been wrong about that too. I was paying attention now. To everything. My phone rang during dessert. Bruce's favorite apple pie, which I'd made from scratch. Another unknown number. Mom? Madeline's voice was small, scared. Please, you have to help us. They're saying we can't leave Spain until this is resolved. Kenneth is talking about divorce, and Richard, he's blaming everything on Nancy. It's falling apart. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, cutting another bite of pie. You're sorry? Mom, we're your daughters. We made a mistake. But we're family. Family, I repeated slowly. Tell me, Madeline, when you were planning to put me in Sunset Manor, did you think about family then? Silence. When you forged my signature on legal documents, were you thinking about family? What forged? I don't know what you're talking about. When you calculated that my house would be worth $75,000 to each of you after taxes, were you thinking about family? Her sharp intake of breath told me she knew exactly what I was talking about. Mom, please. We can fix this. We can make it right. You can't unforgery documents, Madeline. You can't unspend $70,000. And you can't undo the fact that you saw me as a problem to solve, rather than a person to love. But we do love you. No, I said gently. You love what I can provide. There's a difference. I hung up and turned off my phone. Tomorrow, Agent Reed would probably call with updates. Harrison would continue untangling the legal mess my daughters had created. The world would keep spinning while Nancy and Madeline faced the consequences of their choices. But tonight, I finished my pie in peaceful silence, surrounded by the home I'd fought to keep and the dignity I'd reclaimed. For the first time in 8 months, I wasn't waiting for anyone to call, visit, or need something from me. I was simply, completely, entirely free. Part 4. The morning brought unexpected visitors. I was tending to Bruce's orchids when I heard voices in my front yard. Not the angry, demanding tones of my daughters, but something softer. Through the window, I watched a teenage girl with dark hair arguing with a woman who looked vaguely familiar. I don't care what Mom said, the girl was saying. Grandma Loretta never hurt anybody. If she's in trouble, it's because someone else put her there. My heart caught. I recognized the voice before I recognized the face. Alexis Lowy, my youngest granddaughter, Nancy's daughter, who I hadn't seen since Bruce's funeral 8 months ago. She was taller now, 16, and fierce in the way only teenagers could be when defending someone they loved. The woman with her was Janet Waters, my daughter-in-law, looking uncomfortable and overdressed for a morning confrontation in sensible heels and a tailored coat. Alexis, your mother specifically said, "My mother is in jail in Spain," Alexis snapped. Maybe her judgment isn't the best right now. I opened the front door before I could second-guess myself. Alexis? She spun around, and I saw Nancy's eyes in her face, but without the calculating coldness that had developed over the years. These eyes held warmth, concern, and something that looked like relief. "Grandma!" She ran up the front steps and hugged me with the fierce intensity of someone who'd been told she might never see me again. "Are you okay? Dad said you were having some kind of breakdown, but you look fine to me." Janet followed more cautiously, her expression unreadable. "Mrs. Morella, I hope you don't mind us stopping by." Alexis was insistent. "She always has been," I said, remembering the little girl who used to demand extra bedtime stories and always chose the biggest cookie from my jar. "Come in, both of you." My kitchen felt different with people in it again. Warmer, more alive. I made coffee while Alexis explored the house with the familiarity of someone who'd spent countless childhood hours here. Janet sat stiffly at my table, clearly uncomfortable. "I suppose you've heard," I said, setting cups in front of them. "Some of it," Janet admitted. "Kenneth he's very angry. He says you've ruined everything out of spite." "And what do you think?" Janet was quiet for a long moment, stirring sugar into her coffee with precise movements. "I think," she said finally, "that I've watched your daughters treat you like an inconvenience for years, and I've said nothing because it wasn't my place. But maybe it should have been." The admission hung in the air between us. Alexis returned from her exploration and plopped into the chair next to me with teenage grace. "Grandma, what really happened? Dad keeps saying you lost it and reported Mom's credit card stolen. But that doesn't make sense. Mom has her own credit cards." I looked at this young woman, so much like Nancy had been at that age, but with something Nancy had lost somewhere along the way. Honesty, maybe. Or the ability to see people as more than sources of money and convenience. "Your mother used my credit card to book a $42,000 cruise without asking me," I said simply. "When I discovered it, I reported it as fraud." Alexis's eyes widened. $42,000? For a cruise? 2 luxury suites. Premium everything. And they were planning to tell me afterward that they thought I should sell this house and move to a nursing home. "What?" Alexis's voice cracked with outrage. "This house? But you and Grandpa built this place. All my best memories are here," Janet spoke quietly. "Kenneth mentioned something about Sunset Manor. He said it was for your own good. Did he mention the forged power of attorney?" Or the fact that they'd already calculated how much money they'd each get from selling everything your grandfather and I owned. The color drained from Janet's face. Forged? I showed them the documents Harrison had examined, watching Janet's expression change from discomfort to horror as she processed what her husband's family had done. "Oh God," she whispered. "Kenneth kept talking about arrangements and how we needed to be prepared for when you couldn't take care of yourself anymore. I thought he meant wills and estate planning, not conspiracy to commit fraud." Alexis grabbed my hand. "Grandma, I'm so sorry. I had no idea. When they said you were sick, I believed them. I should have come sooner." "You're here now," I said, squeezing her fingers. "That's what matters." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, 3 generations of women who'd been damaged by the same family's greed in different ways. Finally, Janet spoke. "What happens now? To Nancy and Madeline, I mean. They'll face charges for financial elder abuse and forgery. The FBI is handling the fraud case, and my lawyer is dealing with the forged documents. As for what happens to them personally," I shrugged. "That's up to the courts." "And Kenneth?" Janet's voice was barely a whisper. "That depends on how involved he was. The evidence suggests he was part of the planning, but he didn't directly commit the fraud." Janet nodded slowly. "He's been talking about divorce lawyers. He says Nancy has embarrassed the family and destroyed his reputation." The irony wasn't lost on me. Kenneth, who'd been perfectly happy to help plan my financial exploitation, was now concerned about his reputation. "What will you do?" I asked her. "I don't know. The house is in both our names, but with legal fees and the scandal, I might lose everything anyway." She looked up at me with eyes that held more vulnerability than I'd ever seen from her. I was wondering, "I know this is presumptuous, but would you consider renting out your spare room? I could help with expenses, and Alexis could visit more easily." The request caught me off guard. Janet and I had never been close. She'd always been polite, but distant, treating me like an obligation rather than family. But looking at her now, I saw something I recognized. A woman whose life was falling apart through no fault of her own. "You'd want to live here? With me?" "I've always loved this house," she said simply. "And honestly, you're the only family member who's never tried to use me for something." Alexis bounced in her chair. "Could I have my old room back? The one with the window seat?" I thought about the empty house I'd been rattling around in for 8 months, about the silence that had become both my sanctuary and my prison. The idea of sharing my space again should have terrified me, but instead, it felt like possibility. "We'd need ground rules," I said. "Of course. No access to my financial accounts, no making decisions about my property or my life, no trying to manage me or fix me or decide what's best for me." "Agreed. And if you're here because you want to be, not because you're doing me a favor or because you feel sorry for me." Janet smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in years. "Trust me, after living with Kenneth's family drama, a peaceful house with someone who doesn't want anything from me sounds like paradise." That afternoon, we drove to the storage unit where Janet had been keeping her belongings since Kenneth had asked her to temporarily move out. As we loaded boxes into my car, she told me about the last 8 months of her marriage, how Kenneth had become increasingly controlling after Nancy's involvement in his business deals had started raising eyebrows, how he'd blamed her for his family's problems, how he'd made her feel like a stranger in her own home. "I should have left him years ago," she said, loading a box of books into my trunk. "But I kept thinking things would get better, that if I just tried harder." "I know that feeling," I said. Back at the house, we worked together to transform Bruce's office into Janet's bedroom. As we moved furniture and hung pictures, Alexis regaled us with stories from school, her job at a local bookstore, and her plans for college. Her presence filled the house with an energy I'd forgotten I missed. "Grandma," she said as we were making dinner together, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Are you really okay with Mom and Aunt Madeline being in jail? I mean, they're your daughters." I stopped chopping vegetables and considered the question seriously. "Are you asking if I feel guilty?" "I guess. Alexis, imagine if someone you trusted, someone you loved more than your own life, stole from you, lied to you, and tried to take away your home and your independence. Would you feel guilty for protecting yourself? She thought about it. No, but I'd be sad. I am sad, I admitted. I'm heartbroken that my daughters became people who could do these things to me, but I'm not guilty for refusing to be their victim. That's the difference, Janet said quietly from where she was setting the table, between being sad about what happened and being responsible for it. As we ate dinner, the first real family meal I'd had in months, I felt something settling into place. Not the old normal, with its complicated obligations and unspoken resentments, but something new. Something chosen rather than imposed. My phone buzzed with a call from Harrison Webb. "Loretta, I have news. The Spanish authorities are releasing Nancy and Madeline, but they're both facing charges here when they return. Nancy's husband has filed for divorce, and Madeline's husband is cooperating with the FBI investigation in exchange for immunity. When do they come back? Tomorrow. And Loretta, they're going to want to see you, to try to work something out." I looked around my kitchen, at Janet clearing dishes, at Alexis doing homework at the table, at the life I was building from the ashes of my daughter's betrayal. "Let them want," I said. "I'll be here." But this time, I wouldn't be waiting alone. Part 5. They arrived at sunset, their shadows long and distorted across my front porch. I watched from my kitchen window as Nancy and Madeline climbed out of a taxi, their designer luggage looking incongruous against the suburban simplicity of my neighborhood. They moved like strangers, no longer the united front they'd presented when planning my downfall, but two women who'd discovered that shared guilt was a poor foundation for sisterhood. Nancy looked older, her carefully maintained composure cracked around the edges. Madeline's usual confidence had been replaced by something brittle and desperate. They stood at my front door for a full minute before Nancy finally rang the bell. 3 short, uncertain chimes that seemed to echo through the house like a question. I took my time answering. When I opened the door, they both started talking at once. "Mom, thank God you're—" "We need to explain." "Stop," I said quietly. And they did. The power in that single word surprised all 3 of us. One at a time. "And keep your voices down. I have guests." Nancy's eyes darted past me, searching for signs of who might be inside. "Guests? Your daughter Alexis is doing homework at my kitchen table. Your former sister-in-law Janet is helping me prepare dinner. They're welcome here. You're not." The words hit them like physical blows. Madeline stepped forward, her voice taking on the wheedling tone she'd perfected as a child. "Mom, please, we know you're angry, but we can fix this. We can make it right." "How?" The simple question seemed to confuse her. "Well, we could pay you back. Work out a payment plan, maybe." "With what money?" "Kenneth filed for divorce and froze your assets, Nancy. Richard's cooperating with the FBI to save his own skin, Madeline. Neither of you has a job that could repay $70,000, much less the legal fees you're about to incur." Nancy's facade finally cracked completely. "You did this! You destroyed our lives out of spite! I reported crimes to the appropriate authorities. You destroyed your own lives by committing them. Where are your daughters?" Nancy's voice rose, attracting the attention of neighbors who were beginning to peek through windows. "We made mistakes, but we're still your family." I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me, creating a barrier between my old life and my new one. "Tell me about family, Nancy. Was it family when you forged my signature on legal documents? Was it family when you calculated how much money you'd each make from selling my home? Was it family when you booked a $42,000 vacation on my credit card and planned to surprise me with nursing home brochures when you got back?" Both women had the grace to look ashamed, but it was too little, far too late. "We were trying to help you," Madeline said weakly. "The house is too big for you, and you've been so sad since Dad died. We thought—" "You thought you could steal my money and gaslight me into believing it was for my own good." I looked at my daughters, really looked at them, and saw strangers wearing familiar faces. "When did you stop seeing me as a person and start seeing me as a problem to solve?" Nancy wiped her eyes, smearing expensive mascara that had survived international travel but couldn't withstand the collapse of her carefully constructed life. "What do you want from us? We've apologized. We've admitted we were wrong. What more can we do?" "Nothing," I said simply. There's nothing you can do because this isn't about what you can give me anymore. It's about what you've already taken. But we love you, Madeline whispered, and for the first time, I heard genuine pain in her voice rather than manipulation. I believe you think you do, but love isn't supposed to come with calculations. Love doesn't forge documents or empty bank accounts or plan to warehouse people in nursing homes. What you love is the idea of me, the convenient mother who writes checks and babysits and asks no questions. You haven't loved the real me in years. The truth hung in the air between us like a death sentence. Through the window behind me, I could hear Alexis laughing at something Janet had said. The sound warm and genuine, and everything my daughter's forced enthusiasm had never been. So that's it? Nancy's voice turned bitter. You're just going to throw away 38 years of being our mother? You threw it away when you decided I was worth more to you financially dead than alive emotionally. I pulled my sweater tighter against the evening chill. I'm not throwing anything away. I'm choosing what to keep. A car pulled into my driveway, and Agent Reed stepped out, her presence immediately changing the dynamic on my porch. Nancy and Madeline shrank back as she approached. Mrs. Morella, ladies. She nodded professionally at my daughters. I hope I'm not interrupting, but we need to discuss the charges being filed. What charges? Madeline asked, though her voice suggested she already knew. Financial elder abuse, forgery, conspiracy to commit fraud, and identity theft. The district attorney has decided to pursue this as a federal case given the amount of money involved and the interstate nature of some of the transactions. Nancy gripped my arm with desperate fingers. Mom, you can make this stop. You can tell them it was all a misunderstanding. I looked down at her hand, manicured, soft, the hand of someone who'd never had to work for anything she couldn't steal from someone else. Gently, I removed her fingers from my arm. No, I can't. Because it wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a crime. Agent Reed consulted her tablet. You'll both need to surrender your passports and report to the federal courthouse Monday morning for arraignment. Your attorneys have been notified. As she drove away, my daughters stood on my porch like refugees from their own choices. The taxi that had brought them was long gone, and neither of them had thought to arrange alternative transportation. It was, I realized, a perfect metaphor for their entire approach to life. Assume someone else would handle the inconvenient details. How are we supposed to get home? Nancy asked. I imagine the same way you'd get anywhere when you don't have unlimited access to someone else's money, I said. You figure it out. I turned to go back inside, but Madeline's voice stopped me. Mom, will you visit us? In prison, I mean. When we're convicted. The question pierced something in my chest that I'd thought was already dead. For just a moment, I saw my daughters as they'd been. Little girls who'd skinned their knees and needed Band-Aids. Teenagers who'd cried over broken hearts and needed comfort. Young women who'd called me for advice about everything from job interviews to recipe modifications. But then I remembered the handwritten note calculating my worth, the forged signature on legal documents, the casual cruelty of booking themselves luxury suites while assigning me a closet. I remembered 8 months of loneliness while they'd planned my obsolescence. I don't think that would be healthy for any of us, I said finally. Nancy's face crumpled. So you're just done with us? Forever? I'm done being your victim. I'm done funding your lifestyle. I'm done pretending that love means letting you hurt me. I paused at my front door. If you ever become people capable of real love instead of exploitation, you can call me. But not before. I went inside and locked the door, leaving them on the porch to figure out their own transportation. Through the window, I watched them argue briefly before walking toward the main road, their expensive luggage bumping behind them on the sidewalk. In my kitchen, Alexis looked up from her calculus homework. Are they gone? Yes. Good. Janet made her famous chocolate chip cookies and I didn't want to share. The casual dismissal of her mother's dramatic exit should have troubled me. But Alexis had lived with Nancy's narcissism for 16 years. She understood better than anyone that some people couldn't be fixed, only managed. That night, I sat in Bruce's chair and wrote in the journal I'd started keeping since the cruise incident. The house around me hummed with quiet contentment, Janet reading in the living room, Alexis video chatting with friends upstairs, the dishwasher running through its cycle. I thought it would feel different, I wrote, cutting them off completely. I thought there would be more drama, more pain, more regret. But mostly, I just feel peaceful, like I finally stopped holding my breath. 3 months later, Nancy pled guilty to financial elder abuse and was sentenced to 18 months in federal prison. Madeline received 2 years for her role in the forgery. Kenneth's divorce was finalized, and he lost the house in the settlement. Richard's cooperation with prosecutors earned him probation, but his medical practice never recovered from the scandal. I learned these details not from personal involvement, but from newspaper articles and courthouse records. My daughters had become strangers whose lives occasionally intersected with mine in legal documents, but nowhere else. Janet thrived in ways I hadn't expected. She started teaching art classes at the community center and began dating a widower she met at the library. Alexis was accepted to 3 universities with partial scholarships, and she spent her evenings at my kitchen table writing college essays about resilience and chosen family. On a warm spring evening, almost a year after the cruise that had changed everything, I was tending Bruce's garden when Janet joined me. "Any regrets?" she asked, settling onto the bench Bruce had built under our apple tree. I considered the question seriously, watching bees work among the roses we'd planted 30 years ago. About my daughters? No. About the time it took me to stop being their victim? Every day. But you did stop. That's what matters. Yes, I said, feeling the truth of it settle into my bones. I did stop. The evening air carried the scent of jasmine and the sound of Alexis practicing piano. A song I didn't recognize, but that sounded like hope. I had chosen my family, protected my dignity, and reclaimed my life. The last anchor had been cut, and I was finally, completely free. In the distance, I could hear the train that ran through town every evening at sunset, carrying people to destinations unknown. For the first time in decades, the sound didn't make me feel left behind. It made me feel like I was exactly where I belonged,